I'm Darla Drew, and this is our first edition of Writer's Block. It's a project by Backroom Productions, and it's sponsored by Arts Midwest. We thought of this project as a way to help local writers market themselves, get the word out, and we're working with the Cave Collective because they have the technology to help us stream as well as record for people that couldn't make it here. So instead of saying, too bad you couldn't make it anymore, we're actually using some of the things we learned during COVID to make sure that people have access. And we're working with local writers, whether they're young, old, people with disabilities, and that's some of the lessons we learned from COVID. We could go out and film some of these folks, talk to them, let them read, and they would never have to leave their homes. And so that was one of the things that we really wanted to focus on, was opening this up to a wider audience. So right now with me today is a local writer, musician, legend, writer, you know, the columnist, whatever. This is Steve Thorpe right here, people.
Thank you.
Well, Steve, you know, since I've introduced you, you better tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here.
Well, I grew up in Newcastle, Wyoming. Hit the road running out of town at 18, went to college, got drafted, decided that was a really bad deal, enlisted, served 4 years in the Army Security Agency. By the time that was over with, I'd had enough. I mean, I was done with corporate America. I got out, and I said to myself, never again anything remotely like that. And took the GI Bill, got an MA in creative writing from UC Davis, and sat home and wrote. When we got pregnant, it was tough. I mean, finally one night, she was all depressed. I said, look, what if I stayed home and took care of the baby? And she said, could you do that? And I said, well, yeah, I'm the oldest of 5, and I've changed a lot of diapers, prepared a lot of bottles. She said, would you? And I said, well, yeah, better than going to Sacramento and being a paralegal. It's something I really didn't want to do. And so I stayed home and wrote and took care of the kid. And that taking care of the kid was a big part of the inspiration for this novel.
Your novel, The Walking Wounded, was also inspired partially by your experience in Vietnam, and I wanted you to expand a little bit on that and how that...
I was never in Vietnam.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, go ahead.
I got the plate because I was in this outfit called the Army Security Agency, and when I left, they made me sign a paper that said, if I told anybody what I'd been doing, anything about it, for the next 10 years, I would get a $10,000 fine and 10 years in Leavenworth. So that was 1970.
So you're free to talk about it now.
I was a cog in a killing machine, and my job was to find them so we could bomb them. Chinese anti-aircraft in Laos. I mean, we weren't supposed to be there. They weren't supposed to be there. I learned things about my country that just, anyway, so I totally disaffected and decided I was going to write. I had a great-grandfather, or great-uncle, who wrote Westerns in the 30s and 40s. And I didn't read them as a kid. I should have. But Grandma and Granddad had this shelf of books. There were 6 or 8 books there, and these were special because Grandma's brother had written them. So you know that was a possibility, and I didn't want to deal with the public. And writing was great. You know, I mean, I could just sit in the basement and just run around my imagination, and I got hooked on it. And finally, at about this, I think Walking Wounded was number 8. And it the way it's sold is typical New York. Okay, I sent it to a National Endowment competition. I sent the first chapter. And I didn't get it. I mean, I've never gotten a grant I applied for. Or I did one, but there was no money in it for me. But anyway, so I sent this off, and I find out I didn't win. And yeah, okay. Typical. I mean, we've been here before. So one day I get this call from this agent at William Morris. And he said, I was reading for the National Endowment, and I read your chapter, and I liked it, and I wondered if you had finished the novel and if you wanted an agent. Well, a friend of mine was trying to hook me up with an agent in England at the time, and I said, well, I've got this thing hanging, but, you know, can I call you if it doesn't work out? And it didn't. And he ended up, he didn't, he said, okay, I'll take it without a contract for a year. It took him exactly a year to sell it. And it got published. Yeah. But I mean, it was.
What year was that, Steve? When did that happen?
Let's see, that was probably 80.
Seven.
Probably late 70s.
Okay, okay.
And it took, the editing process took 2 years. And crazy. I mean, you know, long letters and outlines and do this, and this, and then I'd do it, and I'd have some reservations, and I'd write, you know, do another outline and write a 20-page letter, and this is back and forth like this for at least 2 years. And by the time the novel came out, I was sick of it. I didn't read it for 10 years. I mean, it was 10 years before I actually picked up the book and read it.
When you're talking about that 2-year period, is that when you were working with Barb Evenson, or is that?
No. That was New York.
Okay.
I mean, no, Barb. The editor at Black Hills Books she's amazing.
That's a part of Backroom Productions.
Right.
Barb helped me with this project. So.
And the technology was. It took about a year. Google Docs and cell phones. You know, set on speaker, and we just would discuss things, and we were looking at the same manuscript in Google Docs, and she can change it, and I can change it, and I mean, it was wonderful. Not only that, she edits the way my mentor taught me. I had a mentor early on, before I started grad school, named Willa Gibbs. She wrote historical novels from sometime in the 40s to mid-60s, and oddly enough, had an affair with that great uncle who wrote the cowboy novels. I mean, it was an eerie thing when I met her, and we finally figured out that there was this connection. But she would sit down with me. She edited for me for $3 an hour. And we'd sit down, she'd take something I wrote, and she'd read it. And we're just sitting right together on the couch. And she'd get to something, and she said, what does this mean? And I'd try to explain it to her, and she'd keep pumping me. And finally, I'd say something. She said, write that.
Yeah.
And she also was a proponent of the notion that when you write something, you've got your conscious mind working on it, but your subconscious is throwing things in. And your job when you rewrite is to find those things and bring them out, because that's the heart of the novel.
I'm going to jump in here so I can get to some of the other things that you've done, but what inspires you to write? You talked a little bit about just your lifestyle. It kind of just made sense for you to be a hermit and do this kind of solo work. But what inspires you to get up and do this every day? I mean, it sounds like you went through 3 edits at the least of Walking Wounded. And so how do you keep working?
It's habit. I mean, you get started doing it, and I mean, people say, oh, you're so talented. It's obsession. It's you get into it and you just can't not do it. I mean, I quit for, God, how many years? Sometime in the early to mid-90s, I just quit doing it after I came out here, because I discovered I could actually make a subsistence living playing my own songs. So I just kind of put the writing aside. The pandemic hits, and I'm isolating. You know, I mean, there's no music. You know, I can't. Everybody's masked and scared and getting vaccines, and I'm pacing the floor. And finally, the light. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I think, well, geez. You know, I was always figured when the music dried up, I'd go back to writing novels, and well, the music's dry. Let's go. And I got back at it. I rewrote 3 novels, finished a 4th. No, I rewrote 4 and finished a 5th. And then Barb and I did the new edit on Walking Wounded. We put back some stuff in it that Doubleday had me take out. And I actually like it a lot better this way. Plus, Barb saw some things that I finally managed to bring out. They're not obvious, but I think they work.
So you're saying an editor is integral to your writing, or to anyone's writing. You need to have that other person that can really tell you what's going on with your book.
It really helps. And writers' groups are important, except you've got to be careful. I was in a writers' group in Sacramento that completely destroyed one whole novel because I was with these people and they kept wanting to make my novel their story. And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on, but after I left California and left that, I got to thinking about it, and you can't do that. If you're going to be in a writer's group, you have to help the person make what they're writing better. You know, you have to actually be an editor for somebody else, which is good, because then you can apply that to what you're doing.
You know, our dream for this group is to get enough people together that have experience that maybe they can serve as editors and mentors for some of the younger writers, or not even younger, just writers that are emerging at whatever time of life.
Exactly. And yeah, you don't have to be young to do this.
Yeah, and we need help for each other. We need to boost each other in Rapid City because our community is small. And but I'm finding there's so many writers here. I'm very surprised. And I'll be talking to someone and they'll go, "Oh, my nephew's a writer," or "My son does a great job of poetry," or things like that. So
we had a really fine writers group in Lead before COVID hit, and I mean, there's talk of getting back together finally.
That's good.